Ava Morgan, a Marine veteran with a prosthetic leg, endures cruel mockery from construction workers, led by Foreman Rick Tanner, while walking to a VA clinic in Houston. Her silence masks a heroic past, saving lives in Fallujah, where she lost her leg. Unbeknownst to the jeering crew, Logan Beck, a retired Navy SEAL she once rescued, witnesses the scene. His fury ignites a plan for justice. As Ava continues her walk undeterred, three black SUVs roll in, carrying SEALs ready to confront the workers. The sight falls silent, tension rising. What will happen next? Story shows courage deserves respect. Share her journey to inspire others. Like, comment, and subscribe for more heartfelt stories of resilience. Tell us about unsung heroes in your community. Your support helps amplify voices like Ava's, reminding us to honor quiet strength. Join us for more. Ava Morgan's boots scuffed against the cracked sidewalk, each step punctuated by the faint click of her prosthetic leg, a sound that had become as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. The Houston sun blazed overhead, relentless, baking the construction site in a haze of red dust and shimmering heat. Her worn jeans hugged her frame, the hem frayed where it met the matte black of her prosthetic, a high-tech marvel that replaced the lower half of her left leg, lost to an IED blast outside Fallujah years ago. The weight of her olive green duffel bag tugged at her shoulder, but she carried it with the same unyielding resolve that had once pulled wounded comrades through a hail of gunfire. Tucked inside that bag, beneath her medications and a notepad scrawled with reminders, was her old Marine cap, creased, sun-faded, and heavy with memories of 2 tours and 3 firefights. She never wore it, but its presence was a tether to a life she no longer spoke of, a life that still flickered in her quiet hazel eyes. "Hey, someone call the VA, we got a stray." The foreman's voice sliced through the clamor of hammers and grinding machinery, sharp and mocking. Ava's jaw tightened, her grip on the duffel strap whitening her knuckles. She kept her gaze fixed ahead, her expression carved from stone. "Wrong turn to the welfare office, sweetheart," another voice jeered, followed by a chorus of coarse laughter that echoed across the site. The words stung, not because they were clever, but because they were so carelessly cruel. They didn't know her. They didn't know the nights she'd spent under a skylit by tracer rounds, the weight of a dying Marine's hand in hers, or the way her own blood had soaked the sand. They saw only the limp, the prosthetic, the woman who didn't belong in their world of cinder blocks and steel beams. But Ava didn't flinch, she didn't stop. She moved forward, her steps steady, her silence louder than their taunts. In her mind, she was still a Marine, disciplined, unbreakable, carrying the weight of her past like a rucksack she'd never set down. 15 minutes later, the construction site fell silent, the air thick with an unspoken tension. The roar of engines cut through the stillness as 3 black SUVs screeched to a halt, blocking the entrance like sentinels. 7 Navy SEALs stepped out in perfect unison, their boots hitting the ground with deliberate precision. Their faces were unreadable, eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses, their movements fluid yet commanding. The workers froze, hammers stilled, and the air seemed to hold its breath. No one knew who these men were here for, but as they strode toward Ava, every mocking voice from earlier withered into silence. For the first time that day, no one laughed. Ava stood tall, her heart pounding, but her posture steady, as if she'd been expecting them all along. In that moment, the weight of her service, invisible to the men who jeered, became a presence none could ignore. Back in the quiet of her life, Ava Morgan had returned from the Marine Corps not to fanfare or parades, but to a modest apartment tucked behind a faded strip mall on Houston's east side. The place was small, 2 rooms, a narrow balcony, and walls thin enough to hear the hum of her neighbors' lives. It wasn't much, but it was hers, a sanctuary where questions were few and silence was a steady companion, broken only by the soft ticking of a wall clock. The neighbors knew her as the quiet lady, always polite, always alone. Kids sometimes stared at her prosthetic, whispering questions they thought she couldn't hear. What's wrong with her leg? Why does it click like that? She never answered, never explained. Her story wasn't theirs to know. Every Tuesday, she followed the same ritual, packing her duffel, boarding the 77 bus to the VA medical center. Her cap nestled safely at the bottom of the bag, like a relic of a past she both cherished and buried. That cap had seen her through the chaos of war, its fabric stained with the dust of distant battles. It was her anchor, a reminder that she'd survived when others hadn't. Her prosthetic leg was no mere replacement. It was a testament to her resilience. The matte black surface was functional, unadorned, but to Ava, its soft click with each step was a rhythm of survival, a metronome of progress. She felt every movement, the way the socket hugged what remained of her limb, the subtle shift of weight as she navigated uneven sidewalks. To others, the sound might seem awkward, a marker of difference, but to Ava it was proof she was still here, still moving forward despite the scars, both visible and hidden. At night, when the world quieted, her mind did not. Memories crept in like uninvited guests. The scream of mortar shells, the crackle of a broken radio, the slick warmth of a comrade's blood on her hands as she fought to keep him alive. She'd sit by her window, the blinds casting slatted shadows across her face, watching headlights sweep past like searchlights over a desert compound. Her apartment was still, but her mind was a battlefield, replaying moments she couldn't outrun. The faces of the fallen, the weight of choices made in split seconds, the silence that followed when the guns finally stopped. Yet Ava never spoke of these things. She didn't wear her pain like a badge, didn't drape it over her shoulders like a flag. It was armor, quiet, invisible, forged in fire. She carried it with the same discipline that had guided her through war, a discipline that held her together when the world around her seemed to forget what she'd given. Houston's midday sun was merciless, hammering down on the construction site with a heat that turned the air into a shimmering mirage. Sparks flew from welding torches, trucks rumbled, and voices shouted over the relentless pounding of progress. Ava walked the sidewalk's edge, her duffel slung over one shoulder, her steps measured but unwavering. The workers' taunts still echoed in her ears, but she pushed them aside, focusing on the rhythm of her stride. She wasn't here to prove herself to them. She was here to keep moving, to keep living, to honor the sacrifices etched into her body and soul. And though the world might never know the battles she'd fought, Ava Morgan remembered. Every step, every click, every silent night was a testament to what she'd endured and what she'd overcome. The faint click of Ava's prosthetic leg punctuated each determined step along the cracked sidewalk, a rhythm as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. She'd walked this path to the VA clinic countless times, 5 unassuming blocks from her small apartment. Today, her worn jeans hugged her frame, the denim faded from years of wear, and her olive green t-shirt clung lightly to her sun-bronzed skin, evidence of hours spent outdoors, reclaiming her life one day at a time. To the world, she was just another woman on a quiet errand, blending into the urban hum of distant traffic and chirping birds. But inside, Ava carried a weight far heavier than her steady gait suggested, a mosaic of pride, pain, and resilience forged through years of service and sacrifice. Today, though, someone saw her, not with kindness or curiosity, but with the sharp edge of mockery. "Hey!" A voice sliced through the morning air from behind a chain-link fence bordering a construction site. "Wrong turn, sweetheart. Welfare office is that way." The words landed like a slap, followed by a burst of harsh laughter that echoed off the half-built structure. Ava's jaw tightened, a muscle flickering beneath her skin, but her hazel eyes remained fixed on the path ahead. She didn't falter, didn't slow. Her prosthetic clicked steadily, a metronome of defiance. Inside, though, her chest tightened, not with embarrassment, but with a bone-deep exhaustion. She'd heard it all before, the jeers, the assumptions, the cruelty dressed up as humor. Each one chipped away at her, not because she believed them, but because they reminded her how little some understood the cost of her scars. High above on the second-floor scaffolding, 3 construction workers in fluorescent vests leaned over the railing, their faces split with grins. One, a lanky man with a sunburned neck, exaggerated her limp, dragging his leg in a mocking pantomime. Another, stockier and louder, clutched the railing and staged a dramatic fall, flailing his arms with a fake scream before collapsing into laughter. "Bet she got that leg half price at Goodwill." he shouted, his voice carrying across the site. The others howled, nudging each other like schoolboys reveling in their own cleverness. Ava's fingers tightened around the faded marine cap in her hand, the fabric soft from years of wear. She kept walking, shoulders squared, chin lifted, her silence a shield against their barbs. She'd faced worse. Enemy fire in dusty valleys, the screams of fallen comrades, the agony of recovery. This was just noise, petty and hollow. At ground level, Rick Tanner, the site's foreman, stood with his boots planted wide, a toothpick rolling between his lips. Broad-shouldered and red-faced, his sweat-stained ball cap cast a shadow over his squinting eyes. Tanner wasn't just a bystander. He saw Ava and saw a chance to flex his authority, not through compassion, but through cruelty. He chewed his toothpick with the same focus he gave his clipboard, his gaze locked on her retreating figure. "Somebody call the VA," he bellowed, his voice booming loud enough to draw every worker's attention. "One of their wind-up toys got loose." The crew erupted in laughter, the sound grating against the morning's quiet. Tanner's smirk widened, feeding off their approval. To him, Ava wasn't a person. She was a punchline, a way to cement his place as the alpha of this dusty kingdom. Ava's heart thudded, not with fear, but with a quiet fury that simmered beneath her calm exterior. She'd learned long ago to bury her anger, to channel it into discipline. Her silence wasn't surrender. It was strength, honed through years of enduring what others couldn't imagine. Behind her steady gaze, memories flickered. Nights spent clutching her rifle, the weight of her gear, the searing pain when she'd woken in a hospital bed, her leg gone. She'd fought to rebuild herself, to walk again, to live again. These men, with their easy laughter, knew nothing of that struggle. And yet, their words stung, not because they were true, but because they assumed she was less than she was. Nearby, a teenage girl, no older than 17, stood on the sidewalk, her phone raised to capture the scene. Her eyes sparkled with excitement, a grin tugging at her lips. "This is going viral," she whispered to her friend, who giggled beside her. "Wait till TikTok sees the RoboCop lady." The words twisted in Ava's gut, a fresh reminder of how her pain could be reduced to a fleeting spectacle. No one stepped in, no one told the workers to stop, or the girl to put her phone down. A few crew members shuffled their feet, their laughter fading into uneasy silence. But they said nothing. Even the assistant site manager, leaning against a stack of lumber with his arms crossed, watched impassively, his face unreadable. His inaction spoke louder than any jeer. Ava didn't shout back. She didn't turn to face them. But her silence roared with the weight of everything she carried. Years of discipline, the ache of loss, the pride of service. Inside, a familiar fatigue coiled tighter. Not born of shame, but of the endless need to prove her worth to a world that too often refused to see it. She reached beneath the collar of her t-shirt, her fingers brushing the dog tags that rested against her chest. The metal was warm, molded to her skin from years of wear. She traced her thumb over the faded engraving, her name, her blood type, her branch. The simple act grounded her, a quiet mantra. You endured, you served, you are enough. The jeers faded into the background, drowned out by the steady click of her prosthetic and the thud of her boots against the pavement. Tanner wasn't finished. "Bet she never even saw action," he sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. "Probably tripped over a bar stool in San Diego." The crew laughed again, their eyes darting toward Ava, waiting for a reaction. But she gave them nothing. She kept walking, her pace unchanging, her posture unyielding. Sweat trickled down her neck, dust clinging to her boots, but she didn't rush her retreat. With every step, she reclaimed her dignity, refusing to let their words define her. The dog tags pressed against her skin, a reminder of who she was, not who they assumed her to be. As she neared the corner, something caught her peripheral vision. A black SUV parked half a block away, its tinted windows glinting in the sunlight. The engine hummed softly, a low rumble that seemed out of place in the morning stillness. Someone was inside, watching. Ava's instincts, sharpened by years of training, prickled. But she didn't stop. She didn't know it yet, but justice was already stirring, a force beyond her control, waiting to shift the scales. Just past the construction site, hidden in the dappled shade of a sycamore tree, a black Chevy Suburban sat idling. Its sleek exterior blended into the street, unnoticed by the workers or the passers-by. Behind the tinted windshield, Logan Beck sat motionless, his hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. He wasn't hiding, he was observing, his sharp gray eyes tracking Ava's every step. The hum of the engine was the only sound in the cabin, a quiet counterpoint to the storm she'd just walked through. Logan's jaw was set, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene unfolding before him. He'd been waiting, though, for what even he wasn't yet fully know. But something about Ava's unyielding stride told him he had found it. Logan Beck sat in his pickup, elbows digging into the steering wheel, his weathered hands still bearing the scars of a life spent gripping rifles and climbing ropes. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, locked onto the scene unfolding 30 yards ahead, where a crowd's jeers cut through the dusty air like a blade. Ava Morgan limped past the gate, her prosthetic leg clicking faintly with each step. A tattered Marine Corps cap clutched in her hand. She didn't look back at the laughter, didn't flinch at the taunts, but Logan saw the steel in her posture, the way her jaw tightened against the weight of their scorn. His own jaw clenched, a slow burn of anger rising in his chest, a fury he hadn't felt since the days of blood and dust in Fallujah. He knew her pain, not just the physical toll of her sacrifice, but the deeper wound of being mocked, reduced to a spectacle. It stirred something primal in him, a resolve that had lain dormant for too long. He tugged up the sleeve of his flannel, revealing the faded tattoo on his forearm, a golden trident entwined with an eagle, an anchor, the emblem of a Navy SEAL. The ink had softened with time, but its meaning hadn't. It was a reminder of the battles fought, the lives lost, and the debts he'd never repay. His mind spiraled back to Fallujah, the memory as sharp as a blade. Smoke choked the air, bullets snapped through the haze, and his team was pinned behind a crumbling wall. 3 civilians bled out in the open, their cries drowned by the chaos. Logan had braced for a suicide run when Ava Morgan, young, dirt-streaked, fearless, sprinted into the kill zone. 3 times she crossed that open ground, dragging a life to safety each time. On the third, an explosion tore through the street, and Ava didn't come back whole. She'd saved them all, but at a cost she'd never asked anyone to repay. Logan's throat tightened as he recalled the medal ceremony, his dress uniform stiff, the weight of honors pinned to his chest. Every word of praise felt hollow without her there. Ava had refused the spotlight, vanished into recovery, into a world that didn't know her sacrifice. Now, watching her endure this public mockery, Logan felt a fire ignite within him. He reached for his phone, his movements deliberate, driven by a debt he'd carried for years. "It's Beck," he said, voice low and unyielding. "Send the convoy. It's time." He set the phone on the dash, his eyes fixed on Ava. He wasn't just a retired SEAL. He was a brother in arms, ready to show the world what honor meant. Ava Morgan grew up in a corner of Kentucky where dirt roads outnumbered pavement, and the air carried the scent of earth and diesel. Her family's farm outside Richmond was a stubborn patch of soybeans and livestock, barely yielding enough to keep the lights on. Ava learned hard work young, her hands calloused from hay bales and fence posts. Her father, a man of few words, taught her the pride of a job done right. Her mother showed her how to sew, ride, and mend a fence before she was 12. Life was heavy, but Ava carried it with quiet resolve. By 18, she knew the farm wasn't her future. The land was tired, her parents aging, and she couldn't watch her life shrink into endless rows. So she walked into the Marine Corps recruiting office, diploma in hand, grit in her heart. Boot camp didn't break her. She'd faced harder days on the farm. Ava thrived, sharp and disciplined, fiercely loyal to her unit. She didn't crave praise, only purpose. By her second deployment, she'd earned trust that ran deeper than words. In Fallujah, 3 months into her patrol rotation, her world changed. Her unit was securing a medical supply convoy when an IED detonated, shattering the lead vehicle. Chaos erupted. Gunfire, screams, burning rubber. Ava saw the wounded in the open and acted. 3 times she ran through sniper fire to drag civilians to safety. On the third, an explosion stole her leg, but not her resolve. She'd done what she had to, and that was enough. The deafening roar of the explosion tore through the intersection, a brutal assault on the senses that shattered windows and eardrums with equal ferocity. A Humvee, caught in the blast's merciless grip, flipped onto its side, its engine erupting into flames that licked hungrily at the twisted metal. Amid the chaos, Ava Morgan didn't hesitate. Her heart pounded with a mix of fear and resolve, but her legs carried her forward, straight into the choking smoke and jagged shrapnel. She was a soldier, trained to act when others froze, and her instincts screamed to move, to save, to fight against the destruction threatening to swallow them whole. Her first sprint into the wreckage was a blur of adrenaline. She found a young corpsman, dazed and bleeding, trapped in the mangled remains of the vehicle. His eyes, wide with terror, locked onto hers, and for a fleeting moment, she felt the weight of his trust. With strength born of necessity, she hauled him free, her muscles burning as she dragged him to the relative safety of the median. Her chest heaved, but there was no time to rest. A civilian aid worker, her skin scorched and her screams piercing the air, was next. Iva's hands trembled as she carried the woman to safety, her mind racing with the fear that she might not be fast enough, that the flames or another blast could claim them both. The woman's cries echoed in her ears, a haunting reminder of the fragility of life in this war-torn place. On her third trip back, Ava's focus narrowed to a Marine pinned beneath a jagged piece of metal. His face was contorted in pain, but his eyes held a flicker of hope as she reached for him. She could feel the heat of the fire closing in, the acrid smell of burning fuel stinging her lungs. Her fingers grazed his arm, and she whispered reassurances, though she wasn't sure if they were for him or herself. That was when the second explosion hit, a cruel encore that obliterated her world in a flash of light and agony. When she woke, she was in a sterile military hospital in Ramstein, Germany, the rhythmic beeping of machines a stark contrast to the chaos she'd left behind. Her left leg ended abruptly below the knee, a jarring absence that felt like a betrayal of her own body. Her records noted a silver star and a purple heart, tangible proof of her courage, and her unit's respect was a quiet, unspoken bond that she carried in her heart. But medals couldn't shield her from the hollow silence that followed her service. Returning home was like stepping into a different kind of battlefield, one where the enemy was indifference, cloaked in polite smiles and averted gazes. Employers saw the prosthetic limb before they saw her qualifications, their eyes lingering on the metal where flesh should have been. One manager, his voice tinged with unease, muttered something about liability, his words cutting deeper than any shrapnel. Another dismissed her with a curt, "This job requires long hours on your feet," as he slid her resume aside, uninterested in the story behind her scars. They didn't ask about Fallujah, about the lease she'd saved, or the price she'd paid. To them, she was a liability, a walking reminder of a war they'd rather forget. Ava, who had once outrun fire and defied death, now braced herself for the grocery store, where strangers' stares, whispered questions, or worse, their pity, felt like a new kind of wound. Each step was a battle against the weight of their judgment, her pride warring with the exhaustion of constantly proving herself. The construction site was a different kind of crucible, the summer heat relentless, pressing down on the workers until sweat glistened on their sunburned foreheads. The air was thick with the sharp tang of dust and diesel, a gritty reminder of the labor that filled their days. Earlier, laughter had rung out, a brief reprieve from the grind, but it had faded into a tentative quiet. The crew's eyes kept drifting to the sidewalk, where Ava Morgan had stood moments before, her presence a spark that could ignite their respect or their resentment. She hadn't turned back to confront their lingering glances, but someone else was about to command their attention. A low, ominous rumble rolled down the street, not the familiar groan of a dump truck or cement mixer, but the deep, guttural growl of military-grade engines. 3 black SUVs emerged from around the corner, their movements synchronized like a predator's stalk. Their windows were tinted in impenetrable black, their polished exteriors unmarked by logos or insignias. They didn't honk or slow. They advanced with a precision that spoke of purpose, halting in perfect alignment to block the job site's main gate. The construction workers froze, their tools forgotten. A wrench clattered to the ground, its metallic clang echoing in the sudden stillness. One man removed his hard hat, his fingers moving on instinct, as if the gesture could make sense of the scene unfolding before them. The driver's side doors opened first, followed by the rear ones, and 7 men stepped out in a fluid, practiced motion that spoke of years of training. They wore no camouflage or combat gear, only black tactical pants, fitted dark shirts, and sturdy boots. But their presence carried the weight of authority. Some wore sunglasses, their eyes hidden, while others scanned the site with bare, unyielding gazes. They didn't smile, didn't speak, didn't gesture. They simply observed. Their movements deliberate, their focus sharp as they assessed the site like operators preparing to breach a hostile stronghold. They noted angles, exits, potential threats, their silence more commanding than any shouted order. The construction crew, so boisterous just minutes ago, fell into a stunned hush. Even Rick Tanner, the foreman, stood rooted to the spot, his jaw slack, his mind grappling with the possibilities. Was this a government inspection, a security drill, or something far more unsettling? The men's presence was a disruption, a reminder of a world beyond the job site, one where precision and control were paramount. There was something in the way they moved, not swaggering, not charging, but with a quiet, lethal confidence that made the air feel heavier, the moment more significant. Ava's story, already etched into the crew's minds, now seemed to intersect with something larger, something none of them could yet comprehend. The construction site buzzed with an unspoken authority, not the kind that pleaded for room, but the kind that claimed it outright. Their steps were measured, purposeful, each one staking ownership over the gritty chaos of steel and dust. At the forefront was a man whose very presence seemed to bend the air around him. Logan Beck, his close-cropped, salt-and-pepper hair gleaming under the harsh midday sun, his forearms marked by a trident tattoo and a cryptic line of coordinates that hinted at battles fought and brothers lost. His body was relaxed, but beneath the surface, his muscles hummed with readiness, like a lion pacing before the hunt. He said nothing as he moved forward, his steel-gray eyes cutting through the noise of the site, ignoring the clatter of tools and the groan of machinery. His gaze was fixed on a lone figure 2 blocks away, moving steadily without a backward glance. Ava Morgan, her silhouette unmistakable to him, carried herself with a quiet dignity that only deepened the anger simmering in Logan's chest. The men behind him moved like extensions of his will, their formation tight and instinctive, no orders needed. To the workers, they were enigmas, strangers in tactical gear who'd appeared without warning, their purpose as opaque as the tinted windows of the SUVs they'd arrived in. Just moments ago, the site had been alive with crude jokes and raucous laughter, but their arrival silenced it all, the mirth dissolving like dew under a scorching sun. The only sounds now were the keening wind and the steady, ominous crunch of their boots on the gravel. Logan Beck, a lieutenant forged in the crucible of war, closed in on the foreman, Rick Tanner, who stood awkwardly at the foot of a half-built scaffold. Rick's clipboard hung limp in his hand, a prop rendered useless by the weight of the moment. Not long ago, he'd been the king of this domain, his voice carrying over the din, his smug grin egging on his crew's jeers. Now he fidgeted, sweat staining the armpits of his faded workshirt, his neck flushed a deep crimson under the relentless sun and the scrutiny of the man before him. Logan halted just short of arm's reach, his proximity a challenge in itself. He didn't shout, his voice was low, deliberate, each word a precision strike. Who just humiliated Sergeant Ava Morgan? Rick's eyes widened, the name hitting him like a slap. His cocky facade crumbled, his words stumbling out in a desperate bid to regain control. Look, man, it was just a joke, all right? Nobody meant nothing by it. His voice wavered and he cast a fleeting glance at his crew, searching for allies, but found only downcast eyes and rigid postures. The men who'd laughed along with him now stood mute, their earlier bravado snuffed out. Logan's expression didn't shift. A joke? He turned slightly, his voice carrying effortlessly to the workers nearby, calm but sharp enough to cut through the stifling air. Sergeant Morgan served 2 combat tours in Iraq. In Fallujah, she dragged 3 wounded soldiers, myself among them, out of a burning Humvee while snipers pinned us down. She lost her leg for it. He let the words hang, their weight pressing down on every soul within earshot. That's not a joke. The site fell into a stunned silence. Workers stood rooted, some staring at their boots, others gaping, their minds racing to process the revelation. A few began to grasp the depth of their error, their earlier laughter now a sour knot in their stomachs. Rick's mouth worked soundlessly, his earlier swagger gone, replaced by a hollow dread that left him exposed and small. From the row of SUVs, a younger SEAL stepped forward, his buzz cut stark against his tanned scalp, his lean frame radiating restrained energy. He held up his phone, his voice cold and matter-of-fact. "We recorded everything," he said, his gaze locking onto Rick's. "Every word, every chuckle, every insult you hurled at her." Rick's face blanched, the blood draining from his cheeks as the implications hit home. The SEAL's tone took on a mocking edge. "Mocking a decorated veteran on public property while you're on the clock? Yeah, that's going to look real good when your contractor's office gets a copy." Logan edged closer, his voice now a blade of ice, honed and unyielding. "She never asked for glory or headlines. She never sought the spotlight. But when my squad was bleeding out, insurgents closing in, she ran through a kill zone 3 times to save us. Men like you would have been curled up, begging for rescue, but she didn't flinch." His eyes tightened, his words a quiet hiss that carried more force than a roar. "And you think she's your punching bag?" A soft murmur stirred through the growing crowd. Passers-by, drawn by the sleek vehicles and the crackling tension, had paused to watch. Several held up their phones, not to jeer but to preserve the moment, their faces etched with a dawning respect for the woman they'd never known. Logan turned to face them, his voice steady but resonant. "You laughed at a woman who served with more honor than most men could ever hope to muster. That ends now." Rick's mouth opened again, this time to choke out an apology, but it was too late, the words ringing hollow against the damage done. Logan didn't linger to hear them. In a gesture louder than any speech, he turned his back on the foreman, a deliberate act of contempt that echoed across the site. Behind him, the SEALs snapped into formation, their movements crisp and synchronized, a living testament to their bond, not just with Logan, but with the woman whose courage had forged it. The reckoning had arrived, heavy and undeniable, like a storm breaking over a quiet valley. Ava Morgan was halfway down the cracked sidewalk, her boots scuffing lightly against the concrete, when the sound of footsteps reached her ears. They weren't hurried or hostile, but steady, deliberate, each step carrying the weight of purpose. Her heart quickened, a faint pulse of unease flickering in her chest. She turned slowly, her breath catching as her eyes landed on the figure approaching her. Logan Beck, broad-shouldered and resolute, moved with the measured gait of a man bearing something sacred, something too heavy for haste. Behind him, 6 other Navy SEALs followed in perfect formation, their boots striking the ground in near-silent unison, a solemn rhythm that seemed to still the world around them. The construction site, moments ago alive with a clamor of steel and shouted orders, fell into an eerie hush. No cranes groaned, no hammers rang, no voices carried over the breeze. It was as if the universe itself had paused to witness what was unfolding. Ava's pulse thudded in her ears as Logan stopped just a few feet away, his face a mask of stoic calm. But his eyes, those piercing, storm-gray eyes, held something that made her freeze. It wasn't pity or curiosity, not the fleeting glances she'd grown used to from strangers who didn't know her story. It was recognition, deep and unyielding, a respect so profound it felt like a physical weight settling over her. Logan stood at attention, his posture rigid, his presence commanding. The other SEALs mirrored him, their faces etched with the same gaunt reverence. In a voice that was both sharp and soft, like a blade wrapped in velvet, he said, "Permission to honor you, ma'am." Ava's breath hitched. Her mind scrambled to process the words, the moment, the weight of what was happening. She blinked, her throat tightening as the meaning sank in. Before she could find her voice, Logan raised his hand in a salute so precise it could have been carved from stone. In perfect sync, the 6 SEALs behind him followed, their movements a seamless echo of his. The gesture was not casual, not a performance for onlookers. It was the kind of salute reserved for those who had faced death and emerged unbroken, for heroes who had walked through fire and carried others out with them. Their eyes were locked forward, their spines straight, their resolve unshakable. Ava stood rooted to the spot, her chest tight with a flood of emotions she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Pride, grief, gratitude, and something else. something that felt like being seen for the first time in a long time. Muscle memory took over, her body responding before her mind could catch up. Her right hand rose, fingers curling with the sharp precision drilled into her during her years of service. She returned the salute, not out of arrogance or obligation, but because it was woven into her very being. Yet this time it felt different. It wasn't just a reflex, it was a moment of reclaiming something she'd thought lost forever. It felt earned, like a piece of herself she'd buried long ago had been unearthed and polished to shine again. Logan lowered his hand slowly, his gaze never leaving hers. He reached into a pocket on his tactical vest, his movements deliberate, almost ceremonial. When his hand emerged, it held a small, circular object that caught the sunlight and gleamed with a silver edge. It was engraved with a trident, the symbol of the Navy SEALs, a mark of brotherhood and sacrifice. He stepped closer, cradling it between both hands as if it were a relic. "This," he said, his voice steady but thick with meaning, "is the Brotherhood coin, Navy SEAL issue. It's not given lightly, it's earned." He placed it gently in Ava's open palm, his fingers brushing hers as he folded them around the coin, sealing it in her grasp. "You earned this in Fallujah, but you never got it because you were too busy saving lives." Ava's eyes dropped to the coin, its weight heavier than its size suggested. The trident gleamed, a silent testament to battles fought and lives preserved. She looked back at Logan, her lips trembling as a wave of emotion threatened to break through her carefully constructed walls. Words failed her. Her throat was too tight, her heart too full. The moment pressed against her, not like a burden, but like armor being refitted, molded to her frame after years of lying dormant in storage. She wanted to speak, to thank him, to explain what this meant, but all she could do was stand there, clutching the coin, feeling its edges bite into her palm. Around them, the world had shifted. The onlookers who had been whispering, speculating, or filming her earlier now stood in reverent silence. The young woman who had held up her phone to capture Ava's confrontation earlier now lowered it to her side, her eyes glistening with something closer to shame than curiosity. For the first time in years, Ava didn't feel the need to justify her existence, to explain who she was or what she'd done. She was seen, not as a curiosity, not as a story, but as a person, a soldier, a hero. And more than that, she was honored. The video of that moment spread like wildfire across the internet. By nightfall, clips of Logan's words, "She dragged me out of a burning Humvee," were shared and reshared on every major platform, each post amplifying the story of Ava's courage. News outlets picked it up within hours, their headlines bold and unapologetic. Veterans organizations rallied behind it, their posts accompanied by captions like, "This is how you honor a hero." By morning, the construction company's headquarters was inundated with calls, emails, and a resounding demand from the public. Make it right. Within 24 hours, the company issued a formal apology. Its words splashed across their website and social media in bold, unmistakable letters. "We deeply regret the disrespect shown towards Sergeant Ava Morgan. Her courage, sacrifice, and service to this country deserve our utmost respect and gratitude." For Ava, the apology was more than words. It was a validation of her struggle, a recognition of the battles she'd fought, both on the battlefield and in the quieter, lonelier moments since. The coin in her pocket felt heavier now, not with burden, but with pride, a reminder that her sacrifices had not been forgotten. The company's statement rang with a promise of reverence, not ridicule, vowing to transform their work sites into havens of respect and accountability. At the heart of the announcement was the news that Rick Tanner, the foreman whose careless words had sparked the uproar, had been quietly removed from the project. Reassigned to off-site duties with no clear end in sight, his absence was a signal that actions had consequences. Yet, the true weight of the moment lay not in punishment, but in what unfolded next, a ripple of change that no one could have predicted. 7 days later, Ava Morgan found herself staring at an unexpected email. The principal of Roosevelt High School, a modest campus just 2 miles from the construction site, had invited her to speak during Veterans Appreciation Week. The request caught her off guard, stirring a knot of doubt in her chest. Public speaking? Her. Ava had never imagined herself as someone who commanded a stage, especially not in front of a sea of restless teenagers. The thought made her palms clammy, her pulse quicken. She pictured herself stumbling over words, her voice cracking under the weight of hundreds of eyes. But beneath the fear, something else flickered, a quiet conviction. This wasn't about accolades or sympathy. It was about sharing a truth she'd carried for years, one forged in pain and resilience. After a sleepless night, she typed a simple reply: "I'll do it." On a crisp Friday morning, Ava stepped into the auditorium at Roosevelt High, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. She wore a freshly pressed blouse, its soft fabric a contrast to the faded Marine cap she hadn't touched in over a decade. The cap felt heavy with memory, its embroidered emblem a reminder of battles fought and survived. As she crossed the stage, her prosthetic leg tapped softly against the polished wood, each step a deliberate act of courage. The room fell silent, the usual hum of teenage chatter replaced by an almost reverent hush. Standing at the podium, Ava felt the weight of every gaze, but she pushed past it. She didn't recount the chaos of war or flash images of destruction. Instead, she spoke from the heart, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Scars don't mean you're broken," she said, her words cutting through the quiet. "They mean you survived something that tried to shatter you and you kept moving forward." The applause that followed was thunderous, a wave of sound that seemed to lift her. Students rose to their feet, some with glistening eyes, others with expressions of quiet awe. The teachers, standing at the back, clapped longest, their faces etched with pride. For Ava, the moment was overwhelming, a blend of vulnerability and strength she hadn't expected to feel. She left the stage with a quiet nod, her chest tight with gratitude, and a flicker of hope she hadn't felt in years. Back at the construction site, change wasn't just promised. It was carved into reality. At the front gate, the company had placed a single brick, set low in the earth, framed by gleaming steel, and surrounded by smooth, fresh concrete. Etched into its surface in sharp, clear letters were the words, "SGT, Ava Morgan, built on respect." It wasn't a towering monument or a glowing spectacle. It stood humble, unassuming, yet undeniable. Every worker passed it daily, their boots crunching against the gravel nearby. Some paused, their eyes lingering on the inscription, a mix of curiosity and reverence in their gaze. Others gave a subtle nod as if acknowledging a truth they hadn't fully grasped before. A few, in quiet moments, reached down to touch the brick, their calloused fingers tracing the letters before they clocked in. The brick became more than a tribute. It became a touchstone, a reminder of what happens when honor is neglected and what it means when a community chooses to remember. The brick didn't just mark the entrance to a job site, it signaled the start of something larger, a shift that grew with unexpected force. At first, the change was subtle. Murmurs among workers, hesitant glances exchanged over lunch breaks. But soon those whispers turned into conversations, raw and unfiltered. Men who once scoffed at terms like diversity training or sensitivity workshops began signing up for a new program called Respect in the Trades. They didn't join because they were ordered to. Something deeper had taken root. For the first time, they saw the cost of disrespect, not in fines or memos, but in the quiet pain of someone like Ava, whose strength had forced them to look at themselves. The first session was awkward, a room full of rough hands clutching coffee cups, hard hats perched on knees, and long stretches of silence. But when a veteran named Miguel stood up, his voice thick with emotion, the air shifted. He spoke of his brother, a disabled Marine like Ava, who'd been turned away from 4 job interviews over vague safety concerns. The words landed like a blow, cracking open something in the room. Eyes dropped to the floor, throats tightened. By the 3rd session, the men were listening, really listening. By the 5th, they were speaking, haltingly at first, then with raw honesty, about moments they'd stayed silent when they should have stood up, words they'd let slide when they should have challenged them. For some, it was a reckoning. For others, a quiet vow to do better. Ava, meanwhile, kept to herself, uncomfortable with the spotlight that seemed to follow her. She hadn't asked to be a symbol, hadn't sought to have her name etched in stone or her story whispered in break rooms. But life, she'd learned, had a way of turning scars into something sacred. One afternoon, as she sat at a small cafe 2 blocks from the site, sipping coffee and watching the world pass by, a young boy approached her table. He was maybe 10, his sneakers scuffed, his eyes wide with a mix of shyness and determination. A young boy, barely 7 or 8, stood in the quiet hum of the cafe, his freckled face framed by a bowl-cut mop of hair. His red hoodie hung loosely over his small frame, and from its sleeve peeked the edge of a prosthetic arm, a quiet testament to his resilience. He hesitated, his wide eyes fixed on Ava Morgan, who sat at a corner table, her own prosthetic leg tucked beneath her chair. The boy shuffled forward, his sneakers scuffing the floor, and his voice, soft but steady, broke the stillness. "My mom says I'm like you," he said, his words carrying a weight that belied his age. Ava's head snapped up, her coffee cup pausing mid-air, surprise flickering across her face. The boy's gaze didn't waver. "She says I don't need 2 arms to be strong. She says maybe I can be a hero too." Ava's heart clenched, a deep, aching warmth spreading through her chest. She saw herself in the boy's earnest eyes, the same quiet defiance, the same unspoken question of whether the world would ever see past the parts of them that were missing. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, as if sharing a sacred truth. "You already are," she said, each word deliberate, heavy with conviction. "Every morning you get up, every time you choose to keep going, you're a hero. Don't let anyone tell you different." The boy's face transformed, his lips breaking into a radiant grin. Not the practiced politeness of a child trying to please, but the raw, unfiltered joy of being truly understood. His eyes sparkled, and he turned, sprinting back to his mother, who stood watching from across the room, her hands clasped tightly, tears glistening on her cheeks as she witnessed her son's moment of validation. The ripple of Ava's quiet act of kindness spread far beyond the cafe's walls, touching lives in ways she could never have foreseen. It outshone even the viral video that had first brought her story to light. A video capturing her standing firm at a construction site, refusing to let disrespect slide when workers mocked a memorial honor brick dedicated to fallen veterans. That moment of courage had sparked something unstoppable. Veterans, young and old, began making pilgrimages to the honor brick, their fingers brushing its surface as if to draw strength from its quiet dignity. Schools across the region organized field trips, children clutching notebooks as they learned not just about history, but about respect and resilience. The construction company, shamed and inspired in equal measure, didn't stop at an apology. They overhauled their training, ensuring every regional crew understood the weight of their actions. And in the community, conversations shifted. People stopped asking only what happened and began to ask, what can we change? Respect, it seemed, was a contagion, spreading from one heart to another, all because one woman had dared to stand tall when the world tried to make her feel small. 6 months later, Ava Morgan found herself backstage at the National Veterans Conference in Washington, D.C., her heart pounding in her chest. She was no polished speaker, no media darling with a book deal, or a publicist to smooth her edges. She was just Ava, scarred, steadfast, and unexpectedly chosen as the keynote speaker for an audience of thousands. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the hem of her skirt, the soft gleam of her prosthetic leg visible beneath it. She didn't hide it anymore, and the realization brought a quiet pride that steadied her nerves. A Navy SEAL's words echoed in her mind. "You never asked for recognition." It was true, she hadn't sought the spotlight. But now, standing on the cusp of this moment, she understood that she had something far greater than recognition. She had a voice forged in the silent sacrifices of a life marked by loss and resilience, and she was ready to use it. As she stepped onto the stage, the auditorium fell into a hushed reverence, the dimming lights casting long shadows across the room. Rows upon rows of faces looked up at her. Active duty service members in crisp uniforms, veterans with weathered hands and proud postures, military families clutching photos of loved ones, and national leaders whose decisions shaped the world. In the front row, 2 figures stood out like beacons in Ava's vision. Logan Beck, a veteran who had stood by her side during the construction site confrontation, sat in full dress uniform, his arms folded with quiet respect, his eyes steady with the camaraderie of shared battles. Beside him sat the boy from the cafe, Now dressed in a tiny Marine Corps jacket his mother had painstakingly stitched by hand. His small fingers curled protectively around a polished challenge coin Ava had given him during their second meeting, a token of their bond, a reminder that heroes come in all sizes. His face glowed with anticipation, his prosthetic arm resting confidently at his side, no longer hidden but worn like a badge of honor. Ava took a deep breath, the weight of the moment settling over her like a mantle. She stepped to the podium, the stage lights catching the edge of her prosthetic, a quiet declaration of her own journey. "I used to think honor was about medals," she began, her voice soft but clear, carrying to the back of the room, "or ranks or salutes. I thought it was something you earned with grand gestures or loud victories, but I've learned something different." She paused, her gaze sweeping the room, lingering on the boy in the front row whose eyes shone with unwavering trust. "Honor doesn't care how many limbs you have or how straight you stand. It's in how you face the storm when everything tries to break you." The silence in the auditorium was electric, a collective holding of breath. No one coughed, no papers rustled, just the weight of her words settling into every heart. "Some of us come home whole," she continued, her voice steady but laced with the raw edge of experience. "Some of us don't. Some scars you can see, like mine, or his." She nodded toward the boy, whose chest puffed out slightly at the acknowledgement. "And some scars stay hidden, carried in silence. But every single one matters. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it walks with a limp. Sometimes it wears a small red hoodie and holds its head high, even when the world doesn't understand." Her words hung in the air, resonating with the unspoken stories of everyone in the room. Ava stood taller, her heart full, knowing that this moment, this voice, was not just hers, but theirs. The boy in the front row clutched his challenge coin a little tighter, his mother's hand resting on his shoulder, and Logan's steady gaze met hers with a nod of quiet pride. Ava Morgan, once an ordinary woman who refused to bow her head, had become a beacon of courage, not because she sought glory, but because she dared to see and be seen for exactly who she was. The auditorium buzzed with anticipation as a young boy, barely tall enough to see over the crowd, stood on his tiptoes, his face glowing with awe, his eyes white and shimmering, fixed on the stage where Ava Morgan stood, her chin lifted high, her presence commanding despite the weight of her past. The first clap broke the silence, hesitant, like a single raindrop before a storm. Then another pair of hands joined, and another until the entire room erupted into a standing ovation. The sound swelled, reverberating off the towering ceilings, a thunderous roar that has seemed to shake the very foundation of the building. For over 2 minutes, the applause washed over Ava, not as a fleeting moment of praise, but as a tide of recognition for a journey that had been anything but easy. She stepped back from the microphone, not to soak in the glory, but to let the moment belong to everyone in the room who had ever felt invisible. For years, Ava had walked a solitary path, her heart guarded against a world that hadn't always been kind. But now, surrounded by thousands, she felt a spark of something she hadn't dared to embrace since the war, a quiet, unshakable pride. Outside the auditorium, at the entrance to a construction site in Houston, a single brick lay embedded in the earth. It was more than a marker. It had become a beacon. Etched with a name, it drew veterans from every corner of the state, then the nation. Some roared in on motorcycles, their leather jackets adorned with faded unit patches that told stories of battles fought and bonds forged. Others arrived with slower steps, their knees creaking, their hands trembling as they traced the engraved letters with fingertips that carried the weight of memory. For many, this was the first time their sacrifices had been honored in a way that felt real, tangible, public. The brick wasn't just stone, it was a mirror reflecting their resilience, their survival. The community followed in waves. School children came, wide-eyed and curious, their teachers weaving lessons of history and sacrifice into their visits. Families arrived with bouquets of flowers, leaving them as quiet offerings of gratitude. What had begun as a moment of cruelty, a teenager's mocking laughter captured on a phone, had transformed into something sacred. A living monument carved not just into stone, but into the hearts of those who stood before it. The movement that grew from that single act of humiliation was unexpected, organic, unstoppable. It began online, sparked by the same teenager who had once raised her phone to ridicule Ava. Now, filled with remorse and a newfound understanding, she shared a simple phrase: "Let respect be louder than laughter." The hashtag took flight, spreading across platforms like wildfire. Stories poured in, raw and unfiltered, from veterans who had carried their scars in silence, from nurses who had held hands through pain, from firefighters who had run toward danger, from amputees and cancer survivors who refused to let their struggles define them. Each post was a declaration. They were still standing, not despite their wounds, but because of them. The words became a rallying cry, a reminder that strength isn't always loud, that courage often wears a quiet face. At the National Veterans Conference, Ava stood in the spotlight, her voice steady but her heart racing. She was no stranger to scrutiny, to the sting of being judged for the limp in her step or the scars that mapped her body. But as she delivered her keynote address, she felt the weight of every eye in the room, not judging, but listening. Her final words rang out clear and true: "Scars aren't shame. They're proof you survived." The audience rose to their feet once more, but this time the applause wasn't for a speech. It was for a woman who had walked through fire, who had faced mockery in the harsh light of a Houston afternoon, and who had emerged not with bitterness, but with grace. Ava Morgan had never sought to be a symbol, yet she had become one, a testament to the heroes who walk among us, often unnoticed. Some limp, some carry their pain in silence, but all are brave in ways that don't always demand applause. What had started as a cruel joke on that sweltering day had grown into something far greater. A mirror held up to society, asking a question that lingered in the air. How do we treat those who have already given everything? Ava's story wasn't just about one woman, one salute, or one brick in the ground. It was about dignity, about offering respect without needing it to be earned. It was about seeing people, not their medals, their uniforms, or their scars, but their humanity, especially in moments when no one is watching. In a world quick to judge, where loud voices often drown out quiet strength, Ava's story was a call to pause, to listen, to honor. It reminded us that courage doesn't always shout. Sometimes it passes by in silence, clutching a worn cap, asking for nothing but leaving an imprint that lasts.